16. Zail! He tried to move, but could not. Zail! He tried to breathe, but could not. Zail! If not for his training, he would already be dead. His lungs completely deprived of air. Zail, you bloody young fool! You can't die on me now, damn it! The necromancer tried to talk, but although he knew his mouth was open, no sound escaped it. He tried to open his eyes, and at first they resisted. Only with arduous effort did he manage to finally raise the lids enough to see. And only then did Zail discover that he had been made like Grigasmatsi. Even with eyes well suited for the dark, Zail could only make out enough detail to know his terrible fate. He hung like a stalactite high above the first massive chamber, and he and two other mercenaries had come across their previous journey. Like the unfortunate Matsis, Zail's arms and legs had been pinned back tightly. Unlike the sorcerer, though, Zail clearly lacked any purpose for being there. The power that had placed him there desired no sentinel, but rather merely wished the necromancer very, very dead. Zail would die, too, and soon. Already he could feel his body changing, becoming the same as the stalactite. Strange forces leached into his body, altering his structure. Given time, he would become more a part of the mountain than even Grigasmatsi. But before that happened, he would suffocate. Zail, boy, you still gotta be able to hear me. Humbart Wessel's hollow voice echoed through the vast cavern, seeming to come from every direction. Straining, the necromancer managed just to make out the passage through which he and his companion had earlier entered. Somewhere within, the skull no doubt still rested, in many ways as trapped as he. His hopes, which had briefly risen, plummeted. What could a bodiless Humbart do for him? Zail's thoughts grew murkier, and immense exhaustion filled him. If you're hearing me, I'm right to where you left me, remember? You've a sharp mind. You see it in your head? What did the skull hope to accomplish? Zail only wanted to go to sleep. Why did Humbart have to bother him? I think you're listening, lad, or at least I hope so. I don't like the thought of sitting in this dank place the rest of my eternity. You hear me out? Humbart's voice irritated the necromancer. He wanted to tell the undead mercenary to go away, but without legs, Humbart could hardly do that. Your dagger, Zail! You need your dagger to help yourself. His dagger. Zail's eyes widened. Did he still have his dagger? His companion answered that quickly. I can see it, lad. It's just a few feet ahead of me. And 1,000 miles away for all the good it would do if the necromancer could have at least seen it. He could have summoned it to him. Zail, however, had never mastered indirect summoning of objects, especially not under such dire circumstances. He had to see what he desired. The urge to sink into oblivion grew strong again. Listen to me, insisted the skull. It's pointed toward me, with just a little bit of rock covering the tip. There's another rock shaped like a giant's tooth propping up the hilt area. Despite his desire to sleep, Zail listened. In his mind, a picture of his dagger began to form. He even saw Humbart's skull, the empty eye sockets staring hopefully at the blade. But why bother? You see it, don't you, lad? Damn it, if you're still alive and can hear, you've got to see it. And finally, Zail understood. Humbart had been with Zail long enough to know the skills of one who had animated him. He knew that the necromancer needed to see the dagger, so the skull sought to create a perfect picture for him. It would never work. Or would it? It would require what remained of the air trapped in his body. The minute particles here and there that enabled Zail to last 4 or 5 times longer without breathing than a normal man. Zail would have to squeeze his lungs completely empty in order to draw enough strength for this one spell. Meanwhile, Humbart went on with his descriptions. The skull either very optimistic about his companion's chances or merely not wanting to think yet about the alternative. If the latter, Zail could hardly blame him, for thanks to the spell the necromancer had used, Humbart too would suffer. If someone did not find the skull, then useless, the rest of the passage collapsed and shattered him. The former mercenary would be trapped in Namir forever, his spirit unable to move on. That's about it, Zail, lad, the skull shouted, Humbart's voice slightly more subdued. You should have good image now, that is if you heard anything at all. Focusing on the dagger, Zail quickly pieced together the image as the other had described it. He saw the rocks and how the blade lay upon them. He saw again Humbart's skull staring at the partially buried tip. The necromancer visualized each variation in the rocky walls, filling out his picture. With every last iota of strength, Zail fixed on the enchanted dagger, demanding in his mind and heart that it come to him. With it. Zail! Something gleamed, flew out of the cavern as if shot from a crossbow. The trapped necromancer immediately focused on it. The object suddenly veered toward him, a beacon of light in the deathly dark. The ivory dagger flew unerringly toward him. For just a brief moment, Zail recalled what they had been forced to do for Gregis Matzi. Should he now will the dagger to come point first? Should Zail wish the blade to sink deep into his still human flesh? But the situation with Matzi had been different. Not only had the sorcerer been set into place with a purpose, but the spell had been given centuries to do its foul work. Not so with Zail. The transformation had barely begun. With the dagger to guide his work, he could still save himself. The blade suddenly dropped. Struggling, the necromancer brought it back toward him. His concentration had slipped, and worse, he felt his will ebbing. Come to me, he called in his mind. Come to me. It did, moving with such swiftness that at first it seemed it would yet slay him. Only at the last moment did the dagger suddenly veer, darting around at Zail and the stalactite and forcing itself into the necromancer's encrusted hand. The moment the hilt touched, Zail found he could move his fingers. Gripping the blade, he channeled his strength into it. His lungs screamed, his heart pounded madly. The imprisoned spellcaster would not give in. As if struck by lightning, the shell around him shattered. Weakened, Zail plunged earthward. Had he been above the utmost floor of the cavern, he likely would have died, but the stalactite upon which he had been bound hung over the vast drop, and that alone enabled him to recover enough to save himself. As he fell past the ledge, Zail managed to utter a spell. A gust of wind suddenly lifted him upwards. With tremendous effort, Zail managed to take hold of the cavern wall before him. His success proved timely, for the spell suddenly faltered, nearly sending him falling into the abyss. Zail managed to drag himself closely to the upper floor of the cavern. Exhausted beyond belief, he lay there for some time, his breathing ragged and every inch of his body feeling as if someone had dropped Namir on top of him. Zail? Came a tentative voice. I am alive, he croaked back. Are you sure? Returned Humbart's skull. You don't sound like it. Give me time. Ain't like I'm going anywhere, mumbled the necromancer's companion. Gradually, Zail's breathing normalized. His body continued to ache, but at last he could at least move. Under the glow of the dagger, Zail discovered he had not escaped unscathed. His clothing had been reduced to shreds, and his skin had scars everywhere from where the spell had caused the stalactite in his body to begin to merge. Zail had no doubt that his face, too, bore such marks, but he thanked the great dragon that his life had been spared. On unstable legs, the necromancer finally returned to the passage in which the attack had taken place. The rock slide that he and Captain Dumont had discovered had all but vanished, almost as if been blasted away by some tremendous force. Zail held the dagger just before him in case he might be assaulted anew, but could sense no danger. Several yards in, he came across the skull. Ah, lad, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? Or just a sore sight from the look of you? I am not ready to join you in the afterlife, Humbart. Exhausted again, the spellcaster sat down on a large rock. Tell me exactly what happened to me. After the two beastly hands clapped tight on you, you dropped the blade. I worried then that they might flatten you like a bug, but instead those rocky mitts began moving along the walls, heading toward the cavern. They ran you right through the collapse, sending more rock tumbling toward me. You know, I almost got cracked like an egg. Zael could appreciate the skull's apprehensions, but he wanted to hear on the rest. Go on. That's it. You vanished from sight. There was a flash of some ungodly light. Then I started shouting my head off. And I thank you. You saved me. The skull somehow made a snorting sound. Well, I had to. Who else was going to carry me out of this place? Zael frowned as he looked past Humbart. What the skull could not see, apparently could not guess, was that farther ahead a ton of debris now sealed the entrance quite thoroughly. The necromancer doubted that he could either dig or magic his way through. That meant finding an alternative route of escape. Come, Humbart. He picked up the skull and started back into the cavern. You're going the wrong way, lad. No, I'm not. Moment of silence. Then, oh. The pair entered the vast chamber. Holding up the dagger, Zael surveyed his surroundings in every direction. We go that way, he finally said, indicating the mouth of the passage up near the very top of the chamber. That way? And by what route? Humbart had asked an excellent question. At first glance, there seemed no humanly possible manner by which to reach his goal. Zael searched through the ragged remains of his cloak, but found that the rope he had earlier used had vanished. Still, according to the charts he had memorized, the gap above represented his best hope of finding a way out of Namir's gargantuan belly. Staring at the slick surface leading up the passage, Zael took a deep breath and replied, I climb. Of course. Climb? The skull sounded positively aghast. Climb that? Zael, lad, do you think... The rest of his protest became muffled as the spellcaster stuffed him back into his pouch. The necromancer needed no discouragement. His trust in his skills are already quite limited. If he slipped on his way up, Zael very much doubted that he had enough will to cast a spell sufficient to keep every bone in his body from shattering on the harsh surface below. Regardless of that risk, though, he had to try. What Zael had not told Humbart, what he had only come to realize from his own predicament, was that whatever secret existed in Ure planned soon to reveal itself, and that could not, in any way, be a good thing. Gorst came to see Kentril, the giant not at all in a good mood. Albort's not back. Still trying to find some comfortable fit in the dress uniform, Kentril paused from adjusting the jacket to eye his second in command. It's nearly the dinner hour. You should check his room. Aye, Kentril. And his things are still there. Maybe he decided to stay in the city for a while after the others left. Maybe their going made him a little homesick. The captain himself had felt so after bidding his men farewell. Even the pleasure of Atana's company had failed to eradicate the feeling completely. Could be, Gorst grunted, not sounding any more convinced by Kentril's words than the captain himself had been. For once, Kentril wished that he didn't want to have to meet Atana. Albort's absence did not sit well with him. Scout the palace as surreptitiously as possible. Make sure that you've searched everywhere and everywhere. Albort might have gone, but if I get a chance, I'll do the same. Aye. Any hint of Zael? His stuff's in his room, but he's still missing too. And that, in some ways, seemed to bode even more ill than the young mercenary's disappearance. Zael did not seem the type to just go wandering off, not after the concerns the necromancer had expressed. Gorst? Yeah, Kentril. Go armed. The giant nodded, patting the sword dangling at his side. Always do. You taught me that. Carrying an axe around would have drawn some suspicion, but the sheathed sword did not raise any eyebrows, nor would the fact that the massive fighter wandered the halls of the palace seem too out of place. Clearly, as a foreigner, Gorse would be curious about the ground edifice, and besides, for a giant of a man, the mercenary had the stealth of a cat. Gorse started to leave, then hesitated. Control, if I don't find Albord in the palace at all, should I maybe go take a peek in the city? Captain Dumont thought it over, weighing options and lives. Finally, hoping that Albert would forgive him, he answered, No. If he comes to the point of searching the city, we go together or we don't go at all. Alone again, Kentrell tried to finish dressing, but the latest news refused to sit well with him. Now both the necromancer and Albert had gone missing. The captain gave thanks that at least Jodas and the others had left when they had. If not, how long before all of them would have disappeared? Disappeared? Albert had been last seen escorting the rest. No. Forgetting his garments, forgetting even Atana, Kentrell burst from his rooms and saw that the nearest palace window that gave him some glimpse of the torchlit city. He stared down at the shadowed buildings, listened to the celebrating throngs, and tried to convince himself that the horrific thought he had just conjured up could have not happened. Surely the six who had chosen to leave and exited the outer gates, even now journeyed through the sunlit jungle. Surely they, at least, had reached relative safety. Yet some churning feeling within would not let the captain accept what seemed a most reasonable possibility. Atana. She would tell him what was going on. She would some way or another, whether his fears had any merit. He strode through the regal halls, ignoring the salutes of the helmeted guards he passed. Kentrell had only one focus, Juris Khan's daughter, and for once he did not seek her for pleasure. One of the almost faceless servants confronted him as he neared the grand halls. Before the pasty-faced man could say anything, Kentrell seized him by the tailored collar and demanded, Where is your mistress? Where's Atana? Why, I'm right here. Startled, Kentrell released the servant and turned. The beautiful crimson-haired princess wore a robe similar to the one in which she had been clad when aiding in the release of her father from his curse. Far behind her, Kentrell vaguely noted a door he had never seen before. What is it you want, my love? He had the greatest urge to take her in his arms, to forget his problems, but despite how simple it would have been to do so, Captain Dumont could not forget his men. At least 3 had definitely gone missing, and possibly 7 more, excluding the necromancer. Where were you? Helping my father. Her lips pursed in concern. You look troubled, Kenserol. Have I offended you somehow? Again, he had to fight the desire to drown himself in her. I want to talk to you. Kenserol recalled the servant. In private. We're quite alone, she said with a teasing smile. Glancing over his shoulder, the captain discovered that the livered servant figure nowhere it was to be found. Truly, they were swift of feet and as silent as the night. Atana suddenly stood at his side, her arm entwined with his. Let's take a walk, shall we? She led him toward the balcony where Lord Karn had made his appearance after being freed from Quoth Sin. Kenshar wanted to question her even as they walked, but Atana put a finger to his lips and shushed as if he were a child. Gazing into those entrancing eyes, Kenshar could do nothing but obey. The air outside had a slight chill to it, but that caused the mercenary officer to shiver. He had looked forward when Ure could withstand the sun, and the shadow of the mountain would only mean that the aging of day. I so enjoy it out here, his companion murmured. I know we only sit upon a hill, but it feels like a mountain as tall as Namir. It could have been so easy to follow her lead, to let the mood take him. Kentrell refused, though. He had lives to consider. Tana, I need to talk to you. Silly, you already are. Now he grew slightly angry. Don't play games. This is important. At least 3 of my men are officially missing, and now another seems to be nowhere to be found. I'm even growing concerned about the 6 who left, not to mention Zail. Too many people are unaccounted for, and that, in my book, means something terrible is going on. She gave him an almost petulant frown. Surely you're not saying I had anything to do with them? No, of course not. But something's amiss here, and I don't know what to think. Nothing as it should be, not even Gregis Matzi. Gregis Matzi? Her gaze hardened. What about that viper? Kentrell decided he had to tell her. Surely Atana did not know the truth. He gripped her by the shoulders. Atana, your father did not slay him. What do you mean? Father said... Listen to me. He leaned close, letting her see in his eyes that he spoke only the truth. Atana, I found him. Gregis Matzi, that is. He'd been cursed, turned into a part of the caverns below, and used as some sort of hellish sentinel. What were you doing down there? How did you know where to go look for him? Kentrell glanced briefly over his shoulder in order to make certain that no one spied upon them, then answered, Zail found out. He'd been to Matzi's sanctum and there and tried to summon the sorcerer's shade in order to question him about. Turning to the view of the darkened Yurei, Atana muttered, The necromancer. Of course, he would be able to do it. Frustrated, Kentrell spun her to face him again. Listen to me. You know your father best. Has he acted at all different? Is there anything about him that might be of question to you? My father is exactly the way I expect him to be. Something's not right here, Atana, and because of the 2 of us, I've ignored it much too long. Men who depended on me may be dead, and whatever took them could still be lurking in Yurei. Your father... She put a hand to his cheek, caressing him and making it hard for Kentrell to concentrate. Nothing can touch us here. This is the palace of Juris Khan. I have you, and you have me, and that's all that matters, isn't it? How simple it would have been to agree. Her very touch thrilled him, made all else inconsequential. No! As he shouted, he grabbed her wrist. Atana, you've got to take this seriously. You got to stay here and pretend nothing happened. At the very least, I have to go search for Albert and the others. You can't leave. I have you now, and I won't let you go. Kentrell gaped, caught unprepared for the vehemence from which the young woman spoke. Her eyes held a fury he thought not possible. She took a step toward him, and to his surprise, the hardened fighter backed up. I asked Father for you, and he said I could have you. All I wanted was you. I didn't want the others, just you, don't you see? The fury had abated, but in its place Kentrell discovered an unsettling look, a look that seemed to cut through him. He's seen inside and out. Without thinking, he took another step back. Her face softened. It was so lonely there. So lonely. Save him and a few others. And when they were gone, I yearned for something more. Every hair on Kentrell suddenly tightened. As Atana proceeded toward him, the wind seemed to catch her hair and robe, making the former flow wild and sensual. The latter pulled hard against her curved form. Her smile promised everything, and as she eyed him under her lashes, I want you with all my heart, my soul, and my body, Kentrell, she cooed. Don't you want me too? He did. He wanted her. He wanted to give himself to her in whatever manner she desired. The captain wanted to serve her, protect her. But as Juris Khan's daughter reached out for him, something made Kentrell throw himself forward. The mercenary collided hard with Atana. She let out a startled gasp and fell backwards, completely off balance, and dropped over the rail. Atana! Straining, Kentrell tried to reach her, but already she had slipped completely out of sight. He stumbled to the rail, peering down in horror for some sign. Unfortunately, the deep shadow made it impossible to see anything. Kentrell listened, but heard neither a scream nor the sounds of discovery. He fell back, his heart seeming ready to explode. It had never been his intention to kill her. All Kentrell had wanted was to break whatever hold she had upon him. He knew that she had been a wielder of sorcery like her father, and that in her fear of losing him, she must have thought it would have been all right to cast a glamour over him, make him love her more. If she had only understood. Her father. Whatever concerns Kentrell had once had about Lord Khan, they paled now in comparison to his situation. How could he face Yure's master and tell him that his only daughter had plummeted to her death after being pushed by the man she had loved? How? Deep down, Captain Dumont knew that his mind, still not functional properly, contrary thoughts vied with one another, seeking domination. While a part of him worried over Atana's death and its consequences, another part still battled the question of disappearances and the truth about Gregis Mati. One way or another, he had to face Juris Khan. What Kentrell had done could not be ignored. He had to face Khan. He recalled the door he had seen far behind Atana, the one from which it seemed most likely she had come. She had claimed to have just come from helping her father, which suggested the elder monarch could be found wherever the door led. Without hesitation, the mercenary ran from the balcony. The hallway echoed with the sounds of his booted feet, but nothing else. Of the servants and the guards, there existed no sign. Had they heard what had happened and gone to find their mistress' remains? Why had none of them come to the balcony to investigate what had happened? Such matters faded in importance as he came upon the door. Throwing it open, Kentrell saw that it descended deep into the lower levels of the palace. No torches or lamplets the whole way, but some illumination enabled him to see a fair distance down. Veteran reflexes almost made the captain reach for his sword, but then he recalled how that would just look. How would it look to come to explain Atana's fall when he was wielding a weapon? As he started to descend, Kentrell thought about going to find Gorse, but then decided that his friend should be no part of this. This had to be between Juris Khan and Kentrell. With great trepidation, the scarred mercenary followed the steps to their end. At the bottom, a gargoyle head with a ring on its mouth savagely greeted him from an ancient iron door. With nowhere else to go, Kentrell tugged on the ring. A cold yet soft breeze swirled briefly around him. Tazarka. Startled, he let go of the ring, then turned in a circle. Kentrell could have sworn that he had heard Atana's voice, but of course, he had made that forever impossible. Any hint of her presence could have only arrived from his overriding guilt. Reminded of why he had come to this place, Kentrell decided to try to think the ring once more. He already knew that it would not work, but at least... With a slow groan, the iron door gave away. Kentrell stepped inside. Ah! Dumont! What excellent timing! In the center of the chamber within, near a tall stone platform covered in mystic symbols, a smiling Quoth Sin reached an almost friendly hand towards the mercenary. The silver runes of the Vajira's Turanash blazed brightly, and the diminutive figure seemed almost years younger. So enthused was his expression. Baffled, Kentrell slowly walked toward him. Sin? What are you doing down here? Preparing for a sorcerer's feat such as I could have only imagined. Preparing to delve in powers no other Vajira has touched in centuries, if ever. Kentrell looked around but saw no one else in the vast room. Even though he had interacted with sorcerers in the past, even visited them in their own sanctums, this place filled him with an inexplicable dread. Where's Lord Khan? Returning shortly. You might as well wait. He wants you here too. But Kentrell paid him no mind. I've got to go find him. Explain to him what happened to his daughter. Sin frowned. His daughter? What about his daughter? She left but a short time ago. I think the good captain fears that terrible harms come to my dearling Atana. A voice behind the fighter boomed. Startled, Kentrell stumbled away from the door. Through the entrance stepped Juris Khan, looking stronger, more fit, despite his elder years, than Captain Dumont had so far seen him. Lord Khan smiled benevolently at the dismayed figure. She surprised you! She caused you to react instinctively. Atana can be a creature of moods, good captain. You only acted as warranted. But Kentrell could hardly believe that his host could speak so pleasantly about such a terrible accident. While it relieved him that the rogue monarch did not hold him responsible, that did not change the fact that the man's child had fallen to the rocky landscape below. But Atana's dead. At this moment, Juris Khan chuckled. Ha 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 ha! Dead? I should say not. You're not dead, dear, are you? And from behind him stepped his daughter. Captain Dumont let a strangled cry and fell back against the massive platform. I didn't mean to make you upset before, she purred through the door, which she had just walked through, closing on its own accord. As Atana moved closer, she wobbled some, for clearly one leg had snapped in. The middle and the foot of the other twisted to the side. Her left arm bent at an impossible angle behind her, and the right, which reached out to Kentrell, ended in a hand so badly mangled it could not be identified as such. Dirt stained her torn robe, but oddly not a single drop of blood. Her head bent completely to the side, barely held on by the tendons from the neck. You see? Offered Juris Khan. Broken a little, but certainly not dead.